and show evidence of a group of people, so to the larger public and other members of the healthcare team. If we look at promotion and of health and wellness, if we look at the behavioral statements, we'll see A is provide advice on health promotion, provide advice on disease prevention and control is B, provide advice on healthy lifestyles, which is C, and participate in public health campaigns. So we have 4 behavioral statements in this competency standard of 1.1 under the public health domain 1. So if you could please answer the next poll, which asks you, choose the most appropriate learning title for this particular trigger incident that we've just covered. So remember, your trigger incident was, I was asked to participate in a public health campaign. So if you could go, that's your poll, and I'll have a look at the responses now. Okay, so we have 7 interns that have chosen participation in COVID-19 health campaign at Steve Biko Hospital as the most popular appropriate title. We have promotion of health and wellness as the second option, where we have 4 interns that have chosen that. Going on to 6, 7, choosing promotion of health and wellness. So thank you for responding, interns. So what I wanted to speak to you about is if we look at the second one, promotion of health and wellness, and the reason why that is not an appropriate learning title is because it aligns to what that particular competency standard states. So if you look at the competency standard name, that's the description of it. So you would not choose the same description as the competency standard when you are describing your learning title. So please bear in mind that if you do that, you will be given a 0 in terms of the grid that Adele has just spoken about. So the most appropriate title would be participation in COVID-19 health campaign at Steve Biko Hospital, Steve Biko Academic Hospital. So the next poll is, which is the best learning need based on the competency standard? So please, if you could fulfill that for me, and I'll have a look at the poll. Okay, so which is the best learning need based on the competency standard? If we look at the options, majority of the interns are choosing, I needed to learn how to provide advice and participate in public health campaigns. That's fantastic. So that's the correct answer. So from what I'm seeing is there's definitely a clear understanding of what the expectations are in terms of how you would describe what the appropriate learning title is and what is the learning need that is most appropriate for this competency standard. Thank you very much. So let's go on to the next slide. So here what we're looking at is what we just went through in terms of the polls. Now, if you're wondering what those little snippets are on the top, it's just to describe in terms of the criteria that are found in the intern manual that we use as assessors and moderators to assess you. And we rate you based on what you have stated as per the table. So it's really important that you print out that table and use it as a guide when you are writing all of your information for each of the steps in the CBD cycle. So if we look at the first step, which is reflection. So the learning title, as we've established already, is participation in COVID-19 health campaign at Steve Biko Academic Hospital. Here, the title is original, it's descriptive, and it's related to the case or scenario presented, which in this case is public Health Domain 1 and refers to promotion of health and wellness. The next, and there you would get full marks for that one. What triggered the learning? My pharmacy manager asked me to participate in a COVID-19 health campaign, and I did not know what this entailed. So here you can see it's very descriptive as to what the learning need or what the trigger was. The pharmacy manager asked the intern to participate in the campaign, and the intern was unsure as to how this was meant to be done. So here you would obtain a full 3 because you have a clear learning need. You described what happened, what was the trigger, and you indicated what the intern hopes to achieve. And further down, you'll see the learning needs are needed to learn how to provide advice and participate in public health campaigns. And what do I hope to achieve? I hope to be familiar with the steps required to plan and successfully participate in a public health campaign. Now, if you notice, what's really important here is the fact that the intern did not describe the entire learning need and what I hope to achieve based on the COVID-19 health campaign, but merely described that they had to learn a particular skill. And that skill was how to plan and successfully participate in a public health campaign. So please bear that in mind when you're doing the reflection. It's not about the actual activity of COVID-19 or hypertension or diabetes, etc. It is the skill. So you need to explain to the assessor and the moderator what is the skill that you are actually learning when you are reflecting on these CPDs. Okay, the next step is planning. Now, planning is sometimes, as assessors and moderators, we have noticed that it's a difficult section. Interns fail to get full 3 marks in this section, particularly because of various reasons. So I'll go through what the requirements are. So in the planning section, what we want to do is we want you to be able to explain, so what are you planning to do? How are you going to plan whatever you are thinking of doing? What relevant resources are you going to use? And how are you going to do this? So this planning section is related to your evidence section. So your planning and your evidence needs to link up in the sense that whatever you say that you are going to use in your planning section is what evidence you would support in terms of your planning. So for example, if you're planning to make a poster using relevant resources such as from the National Department of Health and the World Health Organization policies and guidelines, also the Pharmacy Council website, provided that you are adding all of the relevant details. So you're being very specific. You are saying which chapter it is, what are the page numbers. You're not just stating or quoting an entire document. You have to be very specific as to what information that you are providing. So if you look at 3 in terms of the assessment grid in your manual, it says to obtain a 3, you need to have a detailed plan provided together with the reasoning behind the planning and specific details of resources to be used, provided and linking to 75% of the behavioral statements. Now, if you look at the next bullet point on the slide, it says, I will include information on health promotion, which is linked to behavioral statement A, healthy lifestyles, which is behavioral statement C, disease prevention and control, which refers to statement B. I will also verify the poster with my tutor. I will use the poster in my health campaigns. I will obtain feedbacks using examples of attendance registers, which links to statement D. I will obtain the participation letter. So you will get approval from whomever it is within the organization that you work in to be able to show that you are allowed to participate and provide this health campaign in your pharmacy. And that links to behavioral statement D. And then you would plan to participate in the COVID-19 screening using the screening tool, which links to behavioral statement D. And then why did you do all of this? I did all of this in order to be able to participate in a public health campaign. So if you look at the information here, all you're doing is you're giving yourself an idea. So it's almost a recipe of how you're going to do what you're going to do to achieve the behavioral statements that are laid out under this particular competency standard. Now, it's important that you link it to the 75% of the behavioral statements. As Adele said, ideally, the requirement is 75%, but to be 100% sure and to ensure that there's no glitches with the other evidence that you have provided, rather give the full amount. But what council is looking for as a requirement is 75% of the behavioral statements. Okay, so when we go on to the next phase, which is implementation, here we're looking at the how, the what, the when, the where. So it's really important that you answer these questions in order to get your full 3 marks for this particular section. So in the description of how, you would say, I consulted the following sources, and you refer to the sources that you described in planning, which is the National Department of Health, which is evidence A, linking it to 1.1a. So you see how important it is to be able to refer to the evidence where you mark your evidence appropriately, and you link that evidence to the behavioral statement in order to explain or show to the assessor and the moderator exactly what your reasoning and thinking is all about. Remember, we have no idea. If you put in evidence A and you say I consulted the following sources, we're not sure which which behavioral statement you are referring to. The next one is World Health Organization policies and guidelines, which is evidence B, which is linked to 1.1b. An SAPC website, which is evidence C, which is linked to 1.1c. So if you look at the behavioral statements for each of them, A is health promotion, that's the Department of Health. WHO guidelines is B, which is advice on disease prevention and control, which World Health Organization does really well. The Pharmacy Council website, in terms of healthy lifestyles, Pharmacy Council has lots of information on healthy lifestyles on their webpage. And then the what, I formulated the poster to use in the campaign, which is evidence D, which is linked to 1.1a to C. So all of the information that you obtained in the statement above, you have put into a poster. So you're linking it to all of the behavioral statements A to C. The next one is how, when, where. I presented the poster at the COVID-19 screening area at the entrance of the hospital on a busy outpatient day, which links to evidence E, which is the attendance register, and you're maintaining patient confidentiality. And here you can even provide pictures as well, provided you block out patient faces. And that would be linked to 1.1d of your behavioral statements. The next one is how. So how did you do this? I did the screening using the screening tool, and you would provide evidence of that screening tool, evidence F, which is linked to 1.1d. I received the feedback from my supervisor and obtained the letter of participation from the health and safety manager, which is evidence G, which is 1.1d. So you can see how all of this information is related to describing, it's related to your planning, but it's also related to how it links up with your behavioral statements. Okay, so we're on to the next poll. So before we go on to understanding what are the types of evidence that you should be using, I'd like to know from you, so what do you think would be the best pieces of evidence that we could use in this particular competency standard? Are you guys having trouble? I'm not seeing any responses. So you just need to type in your responses. Thank you. There we go. So I have World Health Organization information regarding COVID. Perfect. Pictures of the posters. Yes. GPP requirements for screening. Perfect. Poster attendance register. Attendance register plus section for patient or audience feedback to assess impact. Letter of participation from the unit manager. The poster. A national circular on COVID-19. posters, pamphlets, presentations, review documents, attendance registers. Perfect. Sounds like you guys are ready for submitting your CPDs. Well done, guys. Thank you very much. That's perfect. So there's lots of evidence that you could provide in terms of the public health campaign. And you can see you could easily achieve your 75% and exceed that. So that's the recommendation from all of the assessors and the moderators, is for you to exceed more than just 75%, just to be on the safe side. But if you find that you're struggling and you meet the 75%, please go ahead. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Okay, so these are the types of evidence that we would recommend as assessors. But as I said, it's not a hard and fast rule. You can provide other pieces of evidence that you would find appropriate for this particular competency standard. So the documents, the source documents such as the good pharmacy practice, but make sure that you identify the chapter and the page number specific to this particular competency standard. Often we find interns will just quote the Medicines Related Substance Act or the GPP or the Code of Conduct, ethical rules, but don't indicate exactly how does that piece of evidence actually link up with the behavioral statements that is in your competency standard. Health education tools such as the poster, the pamphlet, the actual presentation, the PowerPoint presentation that you have, letter of participation. Important that you show where and which part of the participation was where you were involved. So highlight that in that letter. Attendance register. Remember, if you are delivering information to the public, you need to maintain confidentiality. But if it is to healthcare professionals, you don't have to block out their names. Where does it fit in within all of the above? And so you always link it to your behavioral statements. Okay, very important. That's where the annotations come in. Okay, so in terms of evaluation, this is another step in the CPD cycle that we find to be problematic in terms of interns understanding exactly what is needed in this section. It's quite simple if you look at the table of criteria, the assessment criteria grid, where it clearly states the what, the how, applications in practice, and the future learning need. So in order to obtain a full 3, you need to explain firstly what was learned. So I learned how to provide advice and participate in public health campaigns. So notice here, again, the intern's not referring to the actual COVID-19 public health campaign, but merely referring to the skill that was learned in terms of providing advice and participating in health campaigns. How the learning influenced his or her practice. I would like to learn more on providing advice to other healthcare workers. So in terms of how it influenced your particular area of practice within your organization. So in your pharmacy, you would want to potentially learn more about providing advice on diabetes or asthma or bilharzia, whatever the case may be in terms of the pharmacy that you work at. Applications in practice. So how did you apply this within your practice? You could say, I subsequently, after doing the COVID-19 campaign poster, participated in a diabetic screening day, and I'm now more aware of public health issues. So you've learned the skill. Now you're able to display the skill in another area where you're using it in diabetic screening day. So potentially there you were presenting to a group of people on diabetes and the importance of good health, healthy lifestyles, and how to identify if their glucose is high, for example. And then the future learning need is often where interns fail to provide sufficient information and don't obtain the full 3. So the future learning need, I'm now more confident to volunteer to participate in public health campaigns. So you need to be able to be very descriptive in the evaluation component. Make sure you fulfill all of the what, the how, and how you apply this in practice. Okay, so that was our example. Now we're going into the assessments. So as Adele has mentioned extensively, it's based on a scale of 0 to 3. To earn 3 marks, all of the requirements must be met. And by all, we mean looking at the table of assessment criteria that is available in the manual. Follow assessment criteria for each of the 4 phases of the CPD cycle to ensure that you have a full 3 marks. In addition, you must have used an appropriately professional communication style, free of spelling and grammatical errors, properly punctuated, and trade names must be capitalized. So it's really important. Remember, you are professionals. We expect you to write in a professional manner. Please do not use social media language while you're typing. Ensure that there's no spelling errors. Remember, on the CPD website, there's no autocorrect, so ensure that all of your information that you are typing is free of spelling errors. So in terms of the scale, I think you're familiar with this already. 0 is not yet met, 1 is partially met, 2 is met, and 3 is fully met. Okay, feedback from assessors are really important. So assessors and moderators will give you feedback and provide comments based on what they feel in terms of the CPD that you've just provided. So the comments could be either positive or negative. Positive, merely showing you that maybe you're on the right track, acknowledging that the CPD that you provided was really well done, or it could be negative or a combination of both. Where it could be negative, where the assessor or the moderator would give you specific pointers in terms of which areas did you go wrong and what is the best way to be able to improve that CPD. Remember, the comments are really there to help you to achieve successfully completing your CPD. So make sure you read those comments. We find often comments in terms of annotation of evidence is one of the most common comments that we give as assessors and moderators, and is not necessarily fulfilled by the intern. The comments are guidelines for the next entries, even if the attached entry is assessed as competent. So, go through assessments that are deemed competent. You may have comments that the assessor will guide you for your subsequent CPDs that you may do. Maybe you've done 4 and you need to do 2 more, and it'll guide you in terms of the next steps. Remember, we have a feedback session later in the year, so just diarize that. I think Tabang spoke about that already. Resubmission, if you are found not to be successful in a particular CPD, you need to resubmit a CPD within that particular domain. Each resubmission is a standalone and is treated as a new submission. That's really important to note, is that when you're resubmitting, you have to look at the CPD as holistically as possible. Don't just identify that particular area that you are deemed as not competent. For example, if the evidence was shown to be the area that you got 0 in, don't just focus on the not yet competent section. Look at it as a complete holistic resubmission, as a whole new submission. So it flows easily. The evidence speaks to each other. Remember, if you're changing the labeling on your evidence, it must speak to your planning, as I've mentioned already. So treat that submission as a new submission. And note that each of the resubmissions will actually go to the same assessor. So the assessors are very aware if you've actually corrected those comments, you've made any changes. And often we find interns don't make any changes and just merely resubmit. So be aware of that. You'll definitely fail. You don't want to be resubmitting for an error like that. So to maximize your chance to be eligible to write the intern exam, make sure that you submit early and you are regularly submitting on a monthly basis. And then look at the guidelines in your intern manual in terms of timelines and submissions. Resubmissions, to prevent the need for further resubmissions, make sure to follow the assessor's recommendations or comments. Resubmitted CPD entries are sent to the same assessor, as I've said already. You're allowed to submit 9 CPD entries. And you need to pass 6 of them, and 50% could be resubmissions. And then a fee is levied if you are submitting 10 or more entries, which Tabang has mentioned already. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the CPD assessment results, and that's what it would look like based on whether it's unsuccessful CPD entry or a successful CPD entry. And that arrow is pointing to information where you would find comments based on why it was unsuccessful, and it will be able to help you to make that particular CPD entry successful. Professionalism, plagiarism is really something council does not take very lightly. You are held accountable by the legal department at Pharmacy Council if you are found to be plagiarizing anybody's work. So ensure that you are not merely copying and pasting from the internet, or you're not merely copying and pasting somebody's work from the previous year, for example. There are systems in place to be able to identify plagiarism. So, and there are more stringent methods that are being put into place in the near future. So there will definitely be severe penalties that will be applied. So just be aware of plagiarism. Your CPD submissions should not be seen as just another hurdle in your professional career. It is really an opportunity for you to further develop your professionalism and to grow as a pharmacist and to be the best professional that you can possibly be. Confidentiality is also really important. We find often interns fail to block out names of patients, be it on trailer labels, on prescriptions, and Schedule 6 registers, especially for 5.3, seems to be a common error. And for example, here, if you fail to block out the names of the patients in a Schedule 6 register, that entire CPD would be deemed as unsuccessful because of the confidentiality breach, and you would have to rectify that. Remember, confidentiality in terms of the CPDs only applies to patients, so you don't need to block out information of the doctors, hospitals, or other healthcare professionals, for example, or other facilities. You don't have to block out attendance registers where you have staff on that attendance register. Careful not to blank out all of your evidence in such as signatures. Remember, in order to show the authenticity and validity of a prescription, signatures are important. Make sure that the name is completely obscured. Untidy scribbles like this here will not be accepted. Okay, so you must be unable to identify the patient's details. Okay, so now you are ready to start the stepwise approach to completing your CPD entries. Remember to choose the appropriate domain based on the trigger that you've just experienced. Choose the competency standard that is suitable for that particular trigger. But here are some tips that we thought as assessors and moderators through our experience of assessing that would be useful for you in choosing the most appropriate competency standard for each of the domains. Okay, so when we say recommended, it's a good choice, should present no real problems for any intern. Possible meaning consider it very carefully, only choose it if you are able to collect sufficient evidence that is, and also valid evidence to be deemed as competent for that competency standard. And challenging, we say that you should rather avoid this particular competency standard, as it'll be extremely difficult for you to be able to fulfill and have sufficient evidence based on the environment that you are working at. Okay, so for domain 1.1, we recommend that you do 1.1, which we've just completed, which is quite straightforward and it's easy to fulfill. And remember, this is all about public health. 1.2 we find to be challenging, is only applicable to active participation in the PTC. If you look at it, it's called medicines information. So it's more specific to institutional settings. So if you're working in a hospital pharmacy and you're exposed to the PTC, you could possibly do it, but you need to show how you're actively participating within the PTC. 1.3 we also think is challenging, which is the professional and health advocacy. And here applies to wider health policies and not just internal SOPs. So just be aware, if you have just 2 behavioral statements or just 1 behavioral statement, doesn't mean that it makes it easier. It is just as challenging as the competency standards that may have 5 or 6 behavioral statements. 1.4 is pharmacoeconomics, which is challenging. It's not just merely generic substitution or submission to medical aid. There's much more information into pharmacoeconomics, where you'd have to look at cost benefit, for example. You have to define and explain all of the pharmacoeconomic principles, aligning it to the behavioral statements that is in that particular competency standard. 1.4 is epidemics and disaster management. 1.5, which is possible but must include active participation in development and implementation of disaster management planning. I have seen interns who have attempted 1.5 and have been successful in it, mainly because of COVID-19 and lots of institutions were implementing disaster management plans. So it was really easy for them to fulfill the behavioral statements for that one. And then 1.6 refers to your primary health care. It's recommended, which includes screening activities. Okay, we're looking at domain 2. Domain 2 is looking at safe and rational use of medicines and medical devices. That is the domain. 2.1, we recommend it. And here we're referring to patient consultation, and not a really popular one, but some interns have done it. And you need to include the patient in the discussion. 2.2, which is your patient counseling, which is one of the more popular ones that are done by interns. Make sure that you cover all of the evidence within this particular competency, because we have 9 behavioral statements within 2.2. So ensure that you cover 75% at least in terms of providing evidence. And that's where often interns fail that competency standard because the evidence is insufficient. 2.3 is the refers to patient medicine review and management, which is also possible. It involves more than just a discussion with the prescriber, and it's more appropriate for institutional settings where you do actual medicine review and management. 2.4 is medicine and medical device safety, which is also possible. Here you focus on dispensing errors, not prescribing errors, and it's also better suited for institutional hospital settings. 2.5 is therapeutic outcome monitoring, also possible, also more aligned to hospital institutions. And here you must make sure that you understand what therapeutic outcome monitoring is. It's not merely just looking at a file and saying this patient needs a higher dose, for example. You have to show evidence as to why you need to increase the dose, why you need to decrease the dose based on, for example, if the patient has an underlying kidney failure. So you have to be very specific when it comes to therapeutic outcome monitoring. And interns sometimes choose this because it just has 2 behavioral statements, but it has a lot of information that you need to provide in order to show your competence. 2.6 is pharmacist-initiated therapy, also quite common. We find interns tend to lean towards this one. Just make sure that you fulfill all of the 75% of the evidence. 2.7 is pharmacovigilance, also possible, but just remember with pharmacovigilance in this competency standard, it refers to post-marketing surveillance studies. So ensure you are able to provide evidence for post-marketing surveillance. 2.8 is clinical trials, very challenging for interns to fulfill unless you're working in a clinical trial setting. 3.1. So 3.1 refers to the supply of medicines and medical devices. 3.1, we have a look at medicine production, so more in the manufacturing sector. So if you're an intern that works in manufacturing, 3.1 will work really well for you and you will be able to fulfill all of the behavioral statements. 3.2, supply chain management is the most popular one in this domain, where it's easy to be able to obtain evidence in terms of drug supply management issues. You're able to provide an invoice, for example, and all of the details that Adele has done in her example. 3.3 is challenging, which covers formulary development. Very difficult as an intern. You have to be able to show your knowledge in terms of why you chose that drug for the formulary. So not something that an intern would be involved in. 3.4 we recommend, which is medicine dispensing, quite easy to cover as it covers all of the dispensing activities and some more. 3.5 is medicine compounding, which is also a really popular one in terms of this domain. Although just a single behavioral statement for this one, you have to make sure that you cover the whole spectrum of medicine compounding, be it extemporaneous or bulk compounding. Here you have to provide evidence right from the very beginning of the process of compounding until the end. So how you would provide the calculations, you have to show us exactly how you've done the calculations. Obviously, provide the script that initiated this compounding. For example, provide pictures of how you're doing the compounding, how you're calibrating your scale, how you're measuring it, what measures have you put in place to make sure that you measuring it correctly, how you're mixing it, what equipment you would use to mix it, and then importantly, batch numbers, expiry date, you have to show us all of that on the label, and also ensuring that confidentiality is maintained at the same time. 3.6 is medicines recall, disposal, and destruction, also possible if interns are actually exposed to some form of medicine recall. It doesn't really happen that often. You may not be exposed to it. So just make sure that you have all of the evidence in order to support this particular competency standard. Domain 4, 4.1, Domain 4 looks at organization and management skills. So 4.1 is possible where we look at human resource management, where this competency standard looks at focusing on contribution towards human resource management. If you're involved in human resource within your pharmacy, then you can easily achieve this. But if you're not, rather not tackle this one. 4.2 is financial management. We haven't found someone that's been really successful in financial management in 4.2. We find it to be challenging. It's more suitable for people in institutional and community sectors. So rather avoid it. 4.3, which is pharmaceutical infrastructure management, also possible. But what I've seen from my experience with marking infrastructure is the intern fails to show the infrastructure aspect within the GPP and how it relates to their pharmacy. They lose focus of the infrastructure and focus more on the equipment within the pharmacy. So be cautious on that one, but it is possible to do. 4.4 quality assurance, also really possible to do. Lots of interns have done this one successfully. But again, make sure that you are fulfilling all of the quality assurance requirements, because it's very specific in terms of the behavioral statements that are requested. 4.5 change management, challenging. Interns are rarely ever, from my experience, ever involved in change management. It's more a management issue. So I wouldn't recommend that you fulfill or try to complete this one. And then 4.6 is the most popular, which is policy development. Make a note that it's applying application of policies and SOPs. So ensure that you're not just telling us or showing us evidence of an SOP, but you're actually showing us how that SOP has been applied. Remember, SOPs and policies don't just focus on an SOP, also include your policy. 5.1 here, Domain 5, which refers to professional and personal practice. Here, 5.3 is what is compulsory, so everybody has to fulfill 5.3. Even though, and that refers to ethical and legal practice, the challenge with this one is we find interns don't necessarily fulfill all of the behavioral statements and do not provide sufficient evidence, and that's where they fail in ethical and legal practice. Often they use Schedule 6 registers where they don't block out the patient information, for example, and also they don't show us evidence of how they're keeping abreast with legislation and how are they doing this, what is the evidence that they're providing. Professional indemnity also sometimes is missing within this one. So it's a compulsory one. It's really easy to be able to do. So make sure you're fulfilling all of the 75% of the behavioral statements adequately, and you're providing valid, sufficient information or evidence towards that. Domain 6, which is your last domain, which refers to it refers to educational, critical, and analysis and research. So in this particular domain, 6.1, we think is quite challenging for you to be able to do, where you are expected to show or include application of pharmacy education policy, which is really not something that you would be exposed to as an intern. 6.2, we recommend one of the more common ones, which is provision of education and training. It can be used for the training of pharmacist assistants in the workplace as per their scope of practice. So you can provide training on asthma, for example, provided they are able to dispense whatever it is under asthma on their scope of practice. 6.3 is also possible, practice embedded education or workplace education. Here, only applicable to interns who work in an academic setting, and the teaching or the possible training should be directed at undergraduate pharmacy students. So here, if you're not working as an academic or within an academic environment, it's difficult to fulfill, but those that do, it's an easy competency standard to be able to fulfill. 6.4 is gap analysis. It's challenging. 6.5 also critical analysis, also quite challenging. 6.6, which is your research proposal, easily something that you could do within your pharmacy setting. 6.7, not possible, cannot be completed by interns. And then 6.8 could also be challenging and more suitable towards academic interns. Okay, so now you're ready to complete the CBD cycle. Remember, step 4, complete the cycle, the CBD cycle. But here are some of the guidelines in terms of evidence that we would suggest to you for each of the domains. So domain 1, remember we did public health already, and we've covered all of the potential evidence that you could submit there. 1.2, 1.3 we've said is challenging. 1.4, challenging, but it's more a pharmacoeconomic study with analysis of the outcome. You must have information and knowledge around pharmacoeconomic terms. You must provide evidence of that and show literature that aligns to a pharmacoeconomic study. So difficult to do, but those are the types of evidence we would look for. 1.5 is possible, disaster management plan, accessible in most places, so you'll be able to submit that as evidence. And then 1.6, we would look at the screening tool. Domain 2, we're looking at 2.1, which is recommended. Here we would look at the nature of the problem, the consultation area, duration, language used, whether it's sensitive versus insensitive issues. 2.2, we would look at a counseling plan, looking at potentially the history of the patient. Are you providing information around, did you take a detailed history? Did the patient understand what feedback, whatever counseling information that you had given? So you have to show evidence of that feedback. Maybe a tutor statement as well, and also how you handled sensitive issues within this particular competency standard. 2.3, 2.4, it covers quite a bit of different areas in terms of patient activities. So align your evidence to all of the patient activities within 2.3 and 2.4. So 2.3, we're looking at patient medicine review and management, and 2.4 is medicine safety. So very, very related to patient issues. So ensure that you are providing actual patients and not just a single patient, but multiple patients. 2.5 is possible. That's the therapeutic outcomes. Here we would look for evidence such as lab tests, the actual new prescription, the change in dose, communication with the prescriber and what prescriber notes that have been taken into consideration, journal articles, for example, as well, in terms of latest treatment guidelines for whatever the condition is. 2.7 is also possible, where we're monitoring and reporting. Here, in terms of pharmacovigilance, we'd like to see an adverse drug reaction form. We want to see post-marketing surveillance. So what did you do when the drug came out? How did you monitor to see if there was any reactions in terms of patients who have taken this new drug, for example? Who are you reporting to? What is the reporting structure that you're using? How did you manage those patients? Who did you report to? Did you report it to SAPRA? Did you report it to the pharmaceutical company, for example? And provide evidence of that. 2.6 recommended could include information pamphlet relating to the condition and referring the patient. Sorry, that's 2.8, not 2.6, clinical trials. Remember, clinical trials is difficult to do, so just be aware. You must be able to be working within that environment to be able to provide it. So here I think the numbers have just been switched around. But if we look at 2.8 is clinical trials, so that we don't recommend. But if we look at 2.6, which is pharmacist-initiated therapy, there we want to see evidence of actual information that you've given to your patient in terms of patient-initiated therapy. So if you are suggesting a drug for worm infestation, for example, what evidence did you give to the patient in terms of how do you get worms, or what do you treat worms with? What did you recommend to the patient? Did you give the correct dosage? Is it for a child? Is it for an adult? How do they prevent the child from getting a recurrence of worms? What are the implications if they don't treat? And if it gets really serious, how do you what information did you provide in terms of referring that patient? So there's lots of evidence that you could provide under PIT. Domain 3 looks at supply of medicines and medical devices. 3.1 is possible, where we're looking at manufacturing. So in manufacturing sector, those interns that work within that sector, just make sure that you're providing evidence that does not breach intellectual property of that organization. Ensure that your tutor is comfortable with allowing you to use those pieces of evidence to support your behavioral statements. 3.2 recommended, lots of evidence that you could provide there. For example, if you're looking at your invoices, you're looking at temperature control and how you managed, for example, thermolabile substances. So lots of evidence that you could provide there. 3.3, challenging to be able to do, that's formulary development. We wouldn't recommend. 3.4, medicine dispensing, easily done, where within your pharmacy practice environment in a pharmacy, you're able to fulfill, for example, how to do calculations for a compounding script. How do you do extemporaneous preparations? What are the anomalies that you may potentially have come across during a prescription, and show evidence of a script that you have corrected based on the wrong dose or wrong dosage interval. So just provide evidence of those types of things. Medicine compounding, lots of things. As I've said before, make sure you follow the good manufacturing practices involved in extemporaneous compounding or bulk compounding. Show us how you did the calculations. Show us how you did the mixing. Show us pictures of every step during that compounding process. Show us the labels that you have provided, which contain the expiry date and the batch number. Show us the batch manufacturing record if you have it available. So lots of important evidence that you need to submit for 3.5. And then 3.6, the last one, disposal and destruction. Also possible, lots of information you could submit there. Who is the company that's destroying the medicine? How did you identify expired stock? What is the latest legislation in terms of disposal? How do you dispose a Schedule 6, for example? Is it different from a normal Schedule 2 and 3? So that's the type of evidence we'd like to see. Domain 4 is your organization and management skills. Here we're looking at more human resource related aspects. So 4.1, we would expect evidence such as HR policies, labor issues, performance assessments, rosters, leave plans, rotations, etc. As I said before, interns are not necessarily directly involved with this, but if you are, you can easily do that competency standard. 4.2, financial management is challenging. Rather avoid that one. But if you are exposed, you are welcome to do it. 4.3 is possible, pharmaceutical infrastructure management. As I've said before, you can easily do this one, but just make sure that you focus not just on equipment within the pharmacy, but you're actually looking at the infrastructure. And what would be really nice is to look at the inspection questionnaire as a guide to evaluate infrastructure within the pharmacy, to see potentially maybe the private, semi-private area is not wide enough or tall enough, or maybe you don't have an air conditioner, for example. So you could use the questionnaire as a guide. 4.4, quality assurance, also possible. If you're looking at updating SOPs, attending training on SOPs, assisting with procedures and processes that ensure quality assurance. So you can achieve this, but be careful that you have to show evidence of how you aligning to quality assurance. 4.5 is change management, not something you would do. 4.6 is policy development. This is the one that is recommended in domain 4, where we're talking about applications of policies and SOPs. So as I've said before, and I'm emphasizing again, important to show evidence of both the policy and the standard operating procedures. So for example, if you're looking at housekeeping as an SOP, you have to show the policy that aligns to housekeeping in that SOP and how you've applied that policy and that SOP to speak to each other. And often the policies that we use is, for example, good pharmacy practice, which is a document that you could show evidence for in terms of application of policies and how it aligns to that particular SOP. You can also show what latest changes are, for example, in medicine disposal and how you're applying that or changing what is currently in the SOP and improving on it. 5.1, 5.3 is the only one that you would do in this particular domain. There's lots of evidence that you can provide for ethical and legal practice. Please, if I could appeal to you to, go outside and think outside of the box and don't just stick to Schedule 6 registers. We've seen a lot of that under 5.3. There's just so much more you could do under 5.3. So just apply your mind about how you would apply the Pharmacy Act and the Medicines Act. How would you practice within the scope of within your scope of practice as a pharmacist or as an intern? How do you keep abreast of all of the current legislation? What information that you would which resources would you use to ensure that you are keeping abreast? Complying with professional indemnity is easy to fulfill, and then practicing and adhering to practices of the Code of Conduct. So Code of Conduct, if you look at the legislation around Code of Conduct, there's just so much you could do and align your daily practices towards Code of Conduct. So there's lots of evidence that you can provide. So please, if you could just stay away from Schedule 6, but if you do, it's accepted. But I'd love to see you apply your mind around 5.3. Domain 6 is the final domain within the CPDs, which covers education, critical analysis, and research. So 6.1, as we've said, it is challenging to do. Looking at pharmacy education policy, which doesn't apply to an intern so much. 6.2, we recommend evidence should include training that is part of an agreed plan. So remember to show us evidence of a training matrix. So for the year, did your pharmacist have a plan in mind of who's going to do what in terms of training? How do you identify a more experienced colleague? Show us information of, what do you consider to be a more experienced colleague? And that's one of the behavioral statements that we're referring to. 6.3 is possible, embedded education in the workplace, which is showing training to undergraduate pharmacy students. But again, academic interns is who would be able to fulfill this competency standard easier. Gap analysis and critical analysis is difficult to achieve, but I have seen some interns attempt it. Difficult, you must be really au fait with what a gap analysis entails and all the research that goes behind it. So it is possible, but it's difficult to achieve. 6.6 is your research project. So recommended here, I'm sure all of your BPharm graduates have done some form of research project in their final year. So you're quite familiar with how to do an actual research. Remember, don't just submit a protocol for this section, especially the academic interns who are working in an academic institution and are doing research. Don't just submit your proposal. You need to submit the final product of your write-up where you're showing results and you're showing discussions and you're showing a conclusion. So very important you provide a finalized write-up or even a published article, for example, that you've published on your research is evidence sufficient enough for this particular competency standard. And then 6.8 is something that is challenging and we wouldn't recommend. Okay, so we haven't forgotten about the tutors. The tutors are really important to us. And remember, you as an intern as well, They are a source of information. They have a lot of experience under their belt, and they potentially have also done, I mean, yeah, CPDs are compulsory, so they have done CPDs. So ensure that you use them as a source of information. And what is their role in terms of how they should be supporting you as an intern? We would recommend, to see them as a role model. They must be competent, and they must practice professionally and ethically within the environment that they're working in. They must serve as a mentor to the intern, where it's an opportunity for self-development through training, and they can use this for their own CPD entries. So remember, training an intern is, a few of your CPDs ticked off for the year. Remember your annual declaration and your 6 CPD activities in order to be deemed as a tutor. Tutor verification, so evaluates the entire CPD entry that the intern has submitted. Make sure that all of the elements of authentication are present and available. Very important that when the interns complete an entry, they must verify it online. You either accept it and then council will obviously release it for assessment to the assessor. And if you don't approve it, it'll be held back, and then you can suggest in terms of where the intern could potentially improve. Verify, and then you can release it, and then it'll go to the assessor for assessment. So what is the role of the tutor? You have a responsibility to familiarize yourself with all of the internship requirements and to timelessly complete reports. I must take this time to say thank you to the tutors for your continuous support to the interns. I know it's really demanding on your time, but thank you for fulfilling that task and encouraging our interns to be successful pharmacists. So in terms of the role that you play to succeed, you play a really important role. As you know, the intern you can't potentially succeed without a tutor. So you provide guidance, you are interactive, empathetic, supportive, and always open to a discussion on whatever concerns that the intern may have. Okay, enjoy the journey, guys. And finally, remember, you're doing the CPDs to be a lifelong learner. CPDs is something you're going to be doing for the rest of your pharmaceutical career. Remember to enjoy the experience, to learn, to develop, and you will become a very successful pharmacist. Good luck, everybody. Please remember to complete the attendance register. Thank you, Natalie. Do we have questions?
Yes, we do. The first question is, what does submitted for moderation mean?
Okay, so moderation means, so you would get all of the assessments that are submitted to council. They all will be assessed by an assessor, and a portion of those would be submitted for moderation. So the moderator's role is to be able to see in terms of how the assessor has marked. Is it a fair process? Is it consistent? Is there anomalies in terms of the way the assessments have been marked? So we would have to gauge and see, looking at it holistically, is that assessment being marked fairly? So that would be the contribution of a moderator. Tabang, do you want to add anything, Adele? Have I missed anything?
Thank you, Veni. Yes, submitted for moderation is just is telling the status of the CPD. Where is it? So it's just telling the CPD is with the moderator, and the moderator will do exactly what Veni has explained. Thank you.
When resubmitting a CPD, does it count as another CPD being submitted, or does it still count as one CPD?
So from the question I'm understanding is if the same CPD is being resubmitted, it is considered to be the same CPD. So when I was explaining to you about treating it as a whole new CPD, meaning that the flow of it has to speak to each other. So the evidence needs to speak to the planning, the reflection needs to speak to the planning and the implementation and the evaluation. So it has to be a uniform flow through it. Doesn't mean that it's seen as a completely new CPD in terms of your submissions, but we would recognize it in terms of the way we mark it as a new CPD. I hope I've answered your question. Adele, do you want to add to that?
Yes, Vinny, thank you. I agree with you. I'm just wondering if the intern can maybe just indicate if you submit a CPD, that's one submission. If you do a resubmission, that will count as a second submission. So you can submit your 6 CPDs, and then every resubmission will count as an additional submission up to the 9th one, which is free. And from number 10, the 10th submission or resubmission in that case will then there will be a fee levied.
Thanks, Adele. So you're referring to the number of times a CPD would be resubmitted. Am I right?
Yeah, depending on what the intern meant with this. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think what they mean, if you submit it once, it counts as one submission, and every resubmission will count towards the tally of 9. And for the 10th one, which will count resubmissions, there will be a payment then.
Thanks, Adele. I hope we've answered your question. Thank you.
Is there another email besides customer care or interns@sapc.za.org for CPD and or exam queries?
For CPD, for interns, those are the 2 contact details that we are using at the moment. There's no any other one. Thank you.
Natalie?
Yes, Mr. Maloka.
Yeah, for the exam, right? We do have, okay, I'm trying to check. We normally use the pre-reg exam workshop. Yeah, that's what we're using. And I've posted it on the chats, pre-reg exam workshops at sapc.za.org. Normally, this is used for exam-related matters, whether it's they want to query about late booking or they want to query about the exam or whatnot. We normally receive queries from that email address, and then we can assist them on that email address. They don't have to copy multiple email addresses. If it's related to the exam, they can just post it to the exam work. It says SAPC email address. If it's CPD, they can use the one that Austerlang has already alluded to. I hope it's clear. I've tried to post it on the chat just to make a distinction as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the pre-reg exam. Why is there a big gap between the August exam and the March exam, but such a small gap between the August exam and the October exam?
Normally when like I think we had this question as well on Friday, Natalie, and we were laughing about it now. I mean, we're just chatting about it. So normally when there's a bigger gap in between August and or so shorter gap between August and October and a bigger gap between March and August is because of the CPD eligibility. The examination for March is normally prepared for those that would have been registered middle of the year towards the end of the year. they will either be in their 6 or 9 month, then we expect them to be competent in all the CPDs that are relevant for those months and progress reports. So we wouldn't even expect an intern that was registered in January to write a March exam. They wouldn't even qualify in terms of the examination entrance requirements. But in terms of August and October, we are covering interns that registered in January or February or March to be able to qualify to sit for the August or October examination. And this is solely because of the CPD that was presented by Dr. Veni and Adele and Taba. If the entrance requirements are not met, we will have a lower number. Previously, we used to have a July examination, but because of the CPD, the low number of interns that were competent in their CPDs, we have to shift it around and push it to August. So July never worked. It has shown that it doesn't work. Yeah, I hope I'm clear. Natalie?
Yes, thanks.
All right.
Just to confirm, we can submit multiple CPDs before a deadline. For example, submitting 3 CPDs between 3 March and 3 April.
Yes, Natalie, that is true. They can submit any number of CPD as long as they are happy. Thank you.
What do we mean by behavioral statements?
Thanks. Thanks, Natalie. So if you remember when Adele was discussing it, she gave quite a good breakdown. Can I share my screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, let me just go back to that. I think it's clearer if I go to the actual slide. So if you look at the way the structure is, the framework of a competency, if you look at the heading, which is domains, that's what I was referring to in terms of all the domains. You have 6 domains, and each domain has a specific area that it covers. So if you're looking at this one, domain 2, we're looking at safe and rational use of medicines and medical devices. That's the umbrella, basically. And then within that domain, you would have competency standards, and each competency has behavioral statements. So if you look at competencies 2.1, that would be patient consultation. That's the heading and the description of that competency standard. Now, within that patient consultation, in order to show how competent you are, council has described behavioral statements that would align to showing how you would be competent to council in achieving doing patient consultation. So the behavioral statements under competency standard 2.1, which is patient consultation, has 8 behavioral statements. So each of those behavioral statements speaks to a specific aspect within patient consultation. So I'm just going to read the first 2 to you. So if you look at under patient consultation, which is your competency standard 2.1, if you look at behavioral statement A, it says undertaking consultations in an appropriate setting with minimal interruption while maintaining verbal, auditory, and personal privacy. And then behavioral statement 2, using appropriate communication and questioning techniques to gather relevant patient information on allopathic, complementary, and alternative medicines and therapy use. So there's multiple behavioral statements under 2.1, but your behavioral statement is exactly as the name suggests, how, in terms of your behavior, what do you need to do in order to show to council that you are competent within that competency standard of patient consultation? Thank you. I hope I answered your question. Adele, do you want to add something there? Sorry.
No, Vinny, I think you covered all the information.
Thank you.
I see I need to submit progress reports on week 12, 24, 36, and 45. Earlier in the workshop, you said you need 7 progress reports and 1 favorable report from Tutor for interns in normal practice. Is it now 4 or 7 progress reports?
Tabang, I assume you're taking this question.
Yeah, I think Mr. Maluka is more appropriate than myself. Thank you.
Maybe Natalie, let me check. Is this in line with I don't know. Let me just check the question. Writing the exam, or what is it? Because the progress reports. Sorry.
Okay, let me come in.
Yeah.
Okay, when I was presenting, I indicated that interns in institutional and community, they need to submit a progress report. I mean, I indicated that the number of progress report differs according to the sector of pharmacy wherein the interns are practicing. So it is the responsibility of the interns to go into the manual and check the progress report applicable for their sector of practice. Thank you.
Okay, for authentic. Yes, Katie.
Okay, no, I was just saying that, yeah, that is fully covered as Tabang is saying in the manual. And yeah, there are several pages. I can't really say page 7, 9, 10. It talks about the progress reports. There's also a nice diagram which we have also shown to see. Look, what she was presenting on was the requirements for the exam, but overall, there are a total number of progress that report that we are looking for. For example, community institutional is 7, manufacturing is 9, and 3 from academia. There must be a declaration of 400 hours and the achievement of the master's degree. So that is also, interns can check that on page 9 of the 2023 intern tutor manual. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay. For authentic evidence, what should be on the evidence? Signature, P number, stamp, intern signature?
Okay, let me go back to the screen. So it is actually all of those aspects, depending on, okay, let me just put up the slide again. Adele, do you want to take some of it while I'm just pulling up the slide?
Yes. With regard to authentic, it depends on what the piece of evidence is to decide if it's authentic. If we go to the slide, I think it's down, valid and then authentic. So you can see authentic is your own work. The evidence must be verified by your tutor. So if you are an academic intern and you are working under the supervision of another pharmacist, then we would expect to find that pharmacist's signature there. Your tutor will verify online. So authentic, depending, as I said, on what it is and what the sectors you are working in, you can add your own signature. The pharmacist for academic and manufacturing interns will use the supervising pharmacist. If your tutor wants to verify it or sign it, they can. But we do see the verification process as your tutor verifying the authenticity of the evidence.
Thanks, Adele. Thanks for coming in. Also, I think, I think this is really important if you're providing evidence that potentially could come from your undergraduate year as well. So just be aware that if you are submitting work that you've done as a group project in your undergraduate year, it's not your authentic work. It's a group project, for example. So ensure that all of the work that you are submitting is actually your work and it's not somebody else's work that you've used. But there are tools in place for plagiarism as well that Pharmacy Council will put in soon. So, just be aware of that in terms of plagiarism and the penalties that go with it. Thanks, Natalie.
Please may I ask how we add the date stamp? Is it enough to just annotate next to the photograph the date it was taken?
Yes, Natalie, I will take that one. Yes, if you don't, your camera can't add the date, you can write the date, or you can make a proper annotation. That's where the annotation is very important. So if it's handwritten or if it's printed by the camera or the phone or what the case may be, that will be acceptable.
I'm an academic intern. Should my tutor at our university submit the progress reports, or should the tutor at the pharmacy I am doing my 400 hours submit the progress report?
Can I come in there, Natalie?
Yes, please.
Okay, so normally with the academic interns, the supervising pharmacist is the one that will complete the report, the 400 hours, but the declaration is done by the tutor. The declaration of the 400 hours is done by the tutor, but the 400 hours report itself should be done by the supervising pharmacist. So what we do, we normally give to permit or allow the supervising pharmacist to have rights to log on into the system and complete that report. And the tutor will also complete the declaration of the 400 hours report as well. So the two will work hand in hand. In the past, the supervising pharmacist did not have rights. So the supervising pharmacist will just write a report, whether in a Word version, and give it to the tutor. But now there's a provision for the supervising pharmacist to be able to complete that online. Then the tutor can also complete the declaration of the 400 hours. I hope that is clear. Okay, thanks, Natalie.
Thanks. For CS 3.5, does knowledge to the formulation mean we need to explain what the medication we're compounding is for, or explaining why we made the formulation the way we did? For example, crushed to a fine powder to ensure smooth mixture.
Thanks, Natalie. So if you look at what the requirements are for 3.5, it purely says medicine compounding. And it says applying pharmaceutical knowledge to the formulation and compounding of medicines. So you can describe what the product is that you're making for, but briefly. But the focus here is purely on the compounding procedure. So you'd have to go into more detail on the actual manufacturing process or extemporaneous process of that particular drug. So yes, your focus should be more on crushing the tablet, mixing it, whatever the case is that you are doing for that particular compounding mixture. Adele, do you want to add something there?
No, I think you covered it. It's more about the steps. If you add things in a particular order and why you do that, or as you said, the crushing of the tablet, more the process of compounding.
Okay, with reference to the word limit, is there a way to increase the words from 1,000 words to something more?
Okay,
Natalie,
thank you. Okay, continue, Adele. I'm sorry.
No, sorry, Tabang. No, the word limit is fixed. And I've been an assessor for a long time, and really we see that the word limit is sufficient. You don't have to write out behavioral statement. You can use abbreviations. And I do think that the word limit can focus your attention to the relevant information and not to write long paragraphs, but mostly the needed information, or focus on the needed information. So Tabang, I don't know if you want to add, but the word count, we see that the word count is more than sufficient to provide all the necessary information.
Okay, no, I agree with you, Adele. I just wanted to add by saying it's 1,000 character per step, meaning each of the 4 steps of CPD, you can go up to 1,000 character. Thank you.
If we refer to the behavioral statement in our evidence self, is it still necessary to refer to it in the implementation phase 2 because we have limited characters to describe a lot of information?
Yeah, I think it is really important to refer to the behavioral statement because remember, as assessors and moderators, we need to know what are you talking about in terms of the implementation section, and what are you referring to in terms of the evidence that you're providing? So it really just completes the story and the description in your implementation. So yes, it is really important. It is one of the requirements in order to fulfill a complete 3 and get 3 for that section. Adele, do you want to add something?
Yes, Vinny, I agree. It is important to link. If you don't link, the assessor might not, or the moderator might not know where the evidence fits in, and it will not align with the implementation if the two is not linked. And as I said previously, be specific. You may use abbreviations for behavioral statement, make it BS. Competency standard is CS. So just focus and write shorter but to the point.
How many marks do we need to be competent in our CPD?
I will take this one. You don't need an amount of marks. The marks is just the indication of the weight that is given to a specific section in the assessment grid. You need to be successful or not yet successful. So it's not based on marks. And as we said, if the evidence is not sufficient, it doesn't matter how many or you received not yet met or fully met or met. So it's not a number of marks. It is the complete activity based on successful completion of all the steps. Vinny, I don't know if you want to add something there.
Thanks. No, that was perfect. Thank you. But also to remember that in terms of the evidence that you're talking about, that's weighted really high. So if you, for example, breach confidentiality, the entire CPD is deemed as not competent. So that's exactly what Adele was trying to explain, depending on the sections. So each of the sections are weighted differently. So you can't actually say there's a specific mark allocated. Thanks, Adele. Thanks, Natalie.
Question from Facebook. Manufacturing. If I'm training other employees, such as cleaners or operators, would I be required to block out their names, etc., to protect confidentiality or not, since they aren't patients? This would be on attendance registers, for example.
Sorry, Natalie, you broke up a bit. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. If I'm training other employees, such as cleaners or operators, would I be required to block out their names, etc., to protect confidentiality or not, since they aren't patients? This would be on attendance registers, for example.
In terms of confidentiality, I mean, the rules that we've discussed is, patient confidentiality has to be maintained. So if there's healthcare workers or co-workers within an organization, I'm not sure, Tabang, in terms of consent, do we have to get consent from people who are working in an environment that are not necessarily healthcare professionals?
No, not really. Confidentiality is only for patients. And in terms of staff, there's no need for consent. We will need consent in terms of other people. Maybe let's say training has been done somewhere else other than in the workplace. Thank you.
Thanks, Tabang. Yeah, so I think patient confidentiality is just what you have to ensure. But in terms of co-workers and healthcare workers, then you don't need to block out names. Thanks, Natalie.
Should your tutor sign each page of your evidence or just your first page?
If the tutor wants to sign the evidence, they can only sign the first page. And remember, please, to submit it as one single document, but there's no need to sign every page because the verification is done on the system online. And even for academic interns and manufacturing interns during their 400 hours, the supervising pharmacist can just sign the first page.
Okay, so are we allowed to upload our CPDs in any orderly manner? For example, uploading my first CPD and main 3 instead of 1.
Yes, I'll take that one as well. You can upload any CPD at any time in any order, as long as you submit one from each domain, but there's no particular order.
So my contract with the manufacturing company is 12 months, and I will complete my 400 hours thereafter. Hence, my internship will have to be extended. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Natalie. The 400 hours is supposed to be completed during the period of internship, because the intern has to be under supervision, under supervision of the tutor. So if the intern completes the 12 months and do it later, especially if the tutor is no longer there as no longer attached to him or linked to him or her, it will be a challenge. So interns are encouraged to complete the 400 hours during the year of internship, meaning within the 365 days. If they do it after the 365 days, they must just make sure that their contract with their tutors has not been terminated, because that will affect council from recognizing the 400 hours. Thank you.
Who should submit the progress report?
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Progress reports are submitted by the tutors and also the supervising pharmacist, just as Hotsuko has explained earlier. Thank you.
What happens to a qualified pharmacist who doesn't submit their CPDs all year?
Okay, thank you. Are they referring to a pharmacist who is not a pharmacist tutor, or a pharmacist who does not submit? Because that one, I think it will be for another platform, not for here.
I think they're referring to a pharmacist who doesn't submit.
Okay, can we leave it for pharmacist platform and we focus on internship matters? Thank you.
For domain 3.5, do you have to have a prescription as evidence if you issue to the wards?
So 3.5 is the compounding one. Yes, you have to have a prescription in order to show what triggered that compounding, whatever it be it extemporaneous or bulk compounding. So yes, you must have a prescription.
Regarding SAPC registration, my registration date on the SAPC certificate I got is 15th of February, is later than the actual date I started my internship, the 23rd of January. Will this affect the end date of my internship and when I can start my community service? I emailed SAPC about it, asking if the date can be changed to 23 January on my registration certificate, but I haven't received a response yet.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. That's true. It will affect the end date, but since the intern is mentioning that a request has been submitted to the office, we will look at it. I hope it will receive attention, and if they meet the requirements, I mean, for the registration to be revised, that will be done. So in case the office cannot revise the registration date, the intern will receive an explanation why not. Thank you.
Is it possible to do domain 1 in a manufacturing setting?
Hi, Natalie. I'll take this one. Yes, if you can do promotion of health and wellness or anything in public health in your setting, that will be doable.
Where can the behavioral statements be viewed?
Okay,
Be-
thank you,
thanks.
Natalie. Oh, sorry, Veni, you can continue.
No, you can go ahead, Tabang.
Okay, thank you. They are provided in the manual. And in addition, I think when I was presenting, I've indicated where they can be accessed on the website from the CPD page. There is CPD, and then that's where they will view the behavioral statement, the competencies, as well as the domains. Thank you.
Should we be in our 6th month by the practice exam or the actual pre-reg exam?
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. In terms of the practice exam, there is really no requirement because that's the practice exam. It becomes a requirement for the actual exam, meaning you must write the practice exam in order to write the actual exam. But there's no entrance examination requirements. So you must be on your 6th month or your 9th month and beyond in order to sit for the pre-reg exam that will be written either in March, in August, or in October. But in between the practice exam, there are no requirements. They are open to an intern that is registered with Pharmacy Council that is intending to write the actual examination. Thank you, Natalie.
Can you use different prescriptions to address different behavioral statements within one CS?
Yes, definitely. If you can't address all the behavioral statements or with one prescription, you can add 2 or 3 or more, as much as is needed to address the behavioral statements.
For domain 3.5, do I have to manufacture a product from a set patient's prescription, or can I manufacture in general an item the pharmacy requires for numerous patients?
Adele, I see you. You want to take this?
Yes. I would be cautious if I'm that intern. You have to dispense you have to compound for a specific patient in a retail environment if you look at the Medicines Act. So wait for a prescription where you have identified a learning need, and then compound for a specific patient if that is the case in a community pharmacy. If it's bulk compounding for a hospital, that's a different scenario, but there will be a prescription. You didn't have sufficient stock for a prescription, but it's not for general items like a baby bum cream or something like that in a pharmacy, no.
Can you do a CPD on small-scale manufacturing in the hospital setting?
Yes, you may. Veni, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. Because I mean, you could easily make an eye drop, for example, or one of the common mixtures we see, Adele, in institutional pharmacies. Potassium, I remember.
Yeah, and they have that
Coal
mouthwash for some of the
Yes.
cancer patients, and so
Yes.
it's more than possible. Yes.
Thank you.
Would the internship program differ dramatically for an intern who intends to complete 6 months of internship only? The intern studied and completed abroad.
Khotsuko, may you please take this one?
For interns who have completed or studied abroad, okay, there's a council resolution on that, so I don't want to take us back, but let me just refer to that resolution. I'll get back to you now.
Okay. With regards to domain 3.5, can the compounding be done in a manufacturing setting in the process of mass manufacture and compounding of a product, or must it be specific to compounding in a pharmacy setting according to a specific patient script?
I think Adele's just answered that question, Natalie, in terms of it has to be a specific patient, but you can't do bulk manufacturing where you could show us all of the, the information that went into manufacturing that particular product in a bulk setting, but you were requested, via script, for example, like morphine solution or UEA in betamethasone, where you show us exactly how you've compounded that mixture on a bulk scale, where you would provide the batch manufacturing records, for example, the batch details, expiry date, etc. But you have to have a prescription that accompanies that particular compounding. Remember, because the purpose of that particular competency standard is to show us what information you are going to provide, to show us that you are competent in compounding. And part of the competency is to show us a prescription where the patient details in terms of not the actual name, but in terms of the trailer labels or even the actual label on the product. So you're looking at batch manufacturing number and you're looking at expiry date. So it's really important that it is provided together with a prescription. I hope that answers your question. Adele, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, Vinny, I don't know what the situation for this intern is, but maybe they should, if they are in manufacturing, maybe look at 3.1 as well, which is open especially for manufacturing interns. To accommodate the manufacturing process. So I don't know in which sector they or what they are doing, but if they go to a pharmacy, maybe 3.5. If they are working in manufacturing, maybe have a look at 3.1, depending on the situation.
Please explain domain policy development.
Natalie, I wanted to come in before this question. In terms of the previous question. Yeah, because like in 2018 as well, there's a resolution that was taken to say if you are foreign qualified pharmacist that you have proven that you've proven that you've done your internship abroad and you do have your work experience, which is 2 years in an institutional or community pharmacy or more than 5 years continuous without a break in between, you can be given 6 months. It's not everyone who qualify for the 6 months internship, but you would be expected to submit your 6 CPDs, of course, and be competent in 4 of them, and also your favorable progress reports by the tutor, that's 12 and 24 weeks, and the summary of outcomes at 24 weeks. And that is prior to registration as a pharmacist. So the progress reports and the CPDs may vary there, but also the emphasis is that you must do your internship in a community or institutional pharmacy. So the exception, or rather the difference, is on the CPD, the progress reports, and the facility. It's not open for. You cannot do an internship in an academic institution or manufacturing. You strictly have to be in an institutional or community pharmacy. I hope I'm clear.
Thanks, KG.
All right.
Please explain domain policy development.
Thanks, Natalie. So in terms of policy development, there's just 2 behavioral statements, which says apply policies, apply standard operating procedures. So here, the exercise requires the intern to show us a particular standard operating procedure that they have chosen. Maybe there was a trigger where they didn't know how to order stock, for example, or what is good housekeeping in the pharmacy, or how to manage Schedule 2 and Schedule 1 recording of OTC medicines, for example. So if we look at that one in terms of Schedule 1s and 2s, the SOP will state according to what the Medicines Act states, what the Pharmacy Act states, what the GPP says, in relation to all of the information that goes with the Schedule 2 product. So it'll say you cannot dispense a Schedule 2 without recording information of the patient, the address, the quantity, etc. For example, I'm just giving you an example. So you would describe how you've applied that particular policy in terms of the circumstances that you are working in. So if you have got a patient who came in and asked for a Schedule 2 product like Brufen syrup or ibuprofen tablets, whatever it may be, you can show us how you applied that Schedule 2 policy in your practice, sorry, SOP in your practice. But then the policy that aligns to that is the good pharmacy practice policy that says this is the information that you need to have in terms of recording your Schedule 2 products. And within your scope of practice as an intern, are you allowed to dispense a Schedule 2 product? So all of the policy information that you have applied in your SOP, you'd have to show as evidence, and that you would refer to the good pharmacy practice. I hope I've explained that sufficiently for you. Thanks, Natalie. Adele, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's perfect.
Do academic interns need to complete 6 CPDs as well?
Yes, they do. They have to adhere to all the requirements for internship, which includes the exam and 6 CPDs.
What are the consequences if we accidentally break confidentiality? For example, if we upload a script with the patient's information?
You will just receive a comment from your assessor or moderator that patient confidentiality has been breached and you need to correct that. And then you will have to do a resubmission.
Nelaveni, I heard you mention a batch record for compounding. Does bulk manufacturing fall under compounding?
Yes, it does. So if you're looking at 3.5, we would accept bulk manufacturing provided that you are fulfilling all of the good manufacturing practices under 3.5, which includes bulk manufacturing. So you have to fulfill all of those processes, as I've explained already, in terms of what the requirements are to show that you are competent in compounding. Thanks.
If you do not supply evidence for 1 out of 3 behavioral statements, would you fail the CPD?
Yes, you probably would, because you have to provide, if there are 3 behavioral statements, you have to give evidence for all 3 of them.
Are there specific pharmacies where academic interns need to complete their 400 hours, or will any pharmacy be sufficient?
Okay, thank you, Natalie. I think when I was presenting, I indicated that the 400 hours should be completed in community or institutional pharmacy. There are no specific ones. As long as the pharmacies are approved to train interns, that will be enough. Thank you.
Those of us who have not yet received our intern certificates, who can we contact?
Okay, the queries should be submitted to customer care, and the interns should also check the progress of their application. But yeah, customer care is the correct place to submit the queries. Thank you.
3.5 medicine compounding in manufacturing setting. As we don't deal with prescriptions, should we use like an order book or page from client for compounding of a specific product as evidence?
I'm just trying to think in terms of what we've seen, Adele, bulk manufacturing, that would be more looking at 3.1, am I right?
Yes, I agree. If we're looking in the manufacturing setting, I would suggest 3.1 rather for the intern. Depending on how they present the evidence, they might do 3.5, but I do think 3.1 would be more appropriate.
Yeah, so because, in terms of 3.5, remember, I'm trying to, It aligns more to extemporaneous preparations, but we do accept bulk compounding from institutional. But if you're coming from a manufacturing sector, you should rather go with 3.1. That would be our advice. Thank you.
4.6 policy developments. Can you apply any policy and any SOP in the pharmacy, or do you need to apply a policy and SOP that are linked?
They don't need to be linked. If you have two different activities, that would be suitable. If they are linked in some way, that's also acceptable. So depending on what you select, but they do not need to be linked. Vinny, I don't know if you would like to add anything there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we've had discussions around whether they need to be linked or not. So the conclusion was they don't have to be linked, but you need to provide evidence to show policy, how you applied that particular SOP and how you applied that particular policy. Thank you. Thanks, Adele.
Okay, this is our final question. How many times can you write the practice exam?
Natalie, there's no limit, but you are required to at least write one practice exam prior to the actual examination. So if you write it once, that will do, because that gives you an idea of how the actual examination would be. And with the practice exam, you are really preparing for the actual exam in terms of your devices and your connectivity and how you actually respond to the question and the usability of the remote system as well. So there's not really a limit, but we recommend at least one practice exam. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, you said it was the last question, eh?
Yes, Tabang is correct.
Okay, thank you so much. Colleagues, let me take this opportunity to thank you all for making time to attend this workshop. We really appreciate your time, and we believe the lessons learned today will assist you in getting your CPDs right, so that you won't miss the opportunities to sit for the exams or to apply for ICSP and be placed on time. So thank you so much, and always feel free to contact the office in case you're having queries. The communication, always remember, it should via customer care, and when necessary, there will be a case generated so that it is easy for you to follow up your case. And we appreciate your time, and I just want to thank the office as well as the assessors and moderators. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.